Thank you for listening to our Mystery Audiobook channel. Please subscribe if you have not done so already, as we release new audiobooks twice weekly. And now, for the feature presentation, The Empire's Shadow. Chapter 1, A Letter from the Crown. Ottawa, March 1902. The bitter winds of late winter howled outside the windows of the modest boarding house on Queen Street. Inside, a small coal fire did little to push back the chill. Detective Eleanor Gray sat at the desk in her room, her fountain pen paused over a half-written letter to her brother in Halifax. Her brown leather satchel lay at her feet, unopened since her return from the Yukon, where her last case had taken her deep into gold rush territory and darker ambitions. She had been promised a month's leave, time to rest, to read, to exist without danger. Instead, there was a knock. She turned. Yes. Mrs. Penwoodin, the stout landlady with eyebrows like angry commas, entered with a silver tray and a letter resting upon it. "This just arrived, Miss Gray," she said, her voice low, her eyes curious. Eleanor took the envelope. The wax seal, deep crimson and imprinted with the insignia of the British Colonial Office, caught the firelight. Penwoodin lingered. "From London, is it?" "Possibly," Eleanor replied coolly. "Thank you, Mrs. Penwoodin." The door closed with a soft click. Eleanor slit the envelope open with the tip of her penknife. Inside was a thick card embossed with an official crest and the distinctive handwriting of Commissioner Harold Rook, the Crown's liaison in Canada. "Detective Gray, you are requested to proceed at once to the settlement of Pinecroft in the Northwest Territories, future province of Alberta. The office has received intelligence suggesting interference at the site of a new petroleum exploration financed by Her Majesty's government. The discovery, if confirmed, is of considerable strategic interest. You are to act with discretion, protect the integrity of the operation, and ensure the safety of Crown assets and personnel. A man has already died. It is believed not to be an accident. A train ticket awaits you at Union Station. Departure, March 4th. Burn this after reading. Commissioner H. Rook." Eleanor read the note twice, her brow furrowing. Pinecroft. She had heard of the place, a remote outpost near the Rocky Mountain foothills, sparsely populated and known more for cattle than commerce. But now it had drawn the attention of London, and someone had died. Not an accident. She stared into the fire, the edges of the letter beginning to curl in its heat. She let the flames devour the message, watching as the wax seal hissed and turned to ash. Her holiday was over, and 3 days later she was en route to Pinecroft. The train rumbled westward, slicing through frozen forests and glistening plains. Eleanor sat in a private compartment, a leather-bound folder on her lap. Inside were clipped newspaper articles and dispatches compiled by the Crown's Intelligence Office. One headline read, "Oil in the West, British interests eye Alberta's black gold." Another, "Engineer's mysterious death, Mars historic exploration." The name of the deceased was Emmett Kersey, a respected geologist with ties to the Geological Survey of Canada. His death, according to local reports, had occurred while conducting a routine inspection of the derrick, but Rook's letter suggested otherwise. Eleanor tapped the paper with a gloved finger. What struck her was not just the potential for sabotage, but the international stakes. Whispers in Ottawa spoke of American oil barons looking north and German industrialists funding exploratory missions in Persia and Mesopotamia. If Alberta did hold a significant reserve, it would alter trade dynamics, energy independence, and perhaps the British Empire's control of its dominions. She pulled out a smaller note, handwritten in cipher. She had translated it that morning with the aid of her codebook. "They know, stop drilling. Before the Crown stakes its claim, the blood will stain the earth black." Who was E, and what exactly did they know? Eleanor folded the note and glanced out the window. the prairies stretched endlessly, vast and windswept. In the distance, the Rocky Mountains loomed. Somewhere ahead, hidden in that rugged terrain, was a secret others were willing to kill for. She checked her pistol, then her pocket watch. 2 more hours to Pinecroft, Alberta, March 7th. The station was little more than a platform and a shack painted in faded green. Eleanor stepped off the train into a gust of sharp, pine-scented air. A man in a thick wool coat and bowler hat was waiting with a team of horses hitched to a wagon. "Detective Gray?" he asked, tipping his hat. "Name's Declan Morley. I work with Mr. Litchfield, the man funding the operation. He said to fetch you soon as you arrived." "Has there been another incident?" she asked as she climbed up beside him. "Not yet," he muttered, glancing around. "But everyone's tense. They think Kersey's ghost is walking the drill site." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "I don't chase ghosts, Mr. Morley. I chase men." "Good," he said grimly, flicking the reins, "because someone up at Turner Ridge wants this oil field to burn, and they don't care how many graves they have to dig to do it." Chapter 2. Beneath the Foothills. The wagon rumbled over the uneven track, wheels slipping now and again on patches of half-frozen mud. The Rocky Mountains towered to the west, their snowy peaks sharp against a pale sky streaked with late-afternoon gold. Eleanor Gray kept her gloved hands in her lap, her mind turning over what little she knew. Declan Morley sat beside her, his posture tense. He was a lean man in his 40s, with sun-scorched skin and the wary look of someone who had lived too long with half-truths and whispered threats. "You said Mr. Litchfield is the financier," Eleanor prompted. Morley nodded. "Aye, Harold Litchfield's a man who can smell opportunity like a wolf smells blood. Made his money in shipping back east, then railroads. Now he's turned west, chasing oil before the Americans corner the market." "And the drilling site?" "Up yonder," Morley said, nodding toward a low hill where a skeleton of timber scaffolding rose against the darkening sky. "The derrick. Turner Ridge, named after the first poor soul who tried to homestead here, froze to death before he could build a roof." "How large is the operation?" Morley hesitated. 30 men or so, drillers, engineers, a few labourers from the town, plus Litchfield's foreign experts. Foreign? A German engineer, Klaus Ritter, supposed to know drilling better than anyone in these parts. Brought in a French-Canadian dynamiter too, name's Alphonse Moreau. His voice lowered. "And then there's Thomas Blackfoot." "Blackfoot?" "An educated man from the Blackfoot Nation, studied geology back east, knows these lands better than any of us, but there's some folks round here that don't like the idea of a savage telling them where to dig." He spat out the last word with contempt. Contempt not for Thomas Blackfoot, Eleanor sensed, but for the small-mindedness that hounded him. Eleanor tucked that information away. "And the townsfolk?" "Some are hopeful. Oil means work, money, a future. Others think it'll bring nothing but ruin." He glanced sidelong at her. They might not be wrong. They crested a small rise. Beyond, sprawled across the foot of the hill, was a muddy camp. Tents, wooden cabins, and the derrick itself. A tower of rough timber lashed together with iron bolts and ropes, rising from a clearing in the pines. Eleanor could smell the acrid scent of burning oil in the wind and hear the distant clatter of machinery. At the centre of the camp stood a larger structure, a hastily built command cabin of rough-sawn timber. Morley guided the wagon toward it. Inside, Eleanor found herself facing Harold Litchfield. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his late 30s, with sleek black hair, a neatly trimmed moustache, and the confident posture of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He wore a brown wool suit under a fur-collared overcoat, and in his hand he twirled a gold pocket watch idly. "Detective Gray," he said, rising to greet her. "A pleasure, though I confess I had hoped we wouldn't have need of you." Yet here I am, Eleanor replied smoothly, removing her gloves. Litchfield's smile did not reach his eyes. Indeed, I trust you had a comfortable journey. Efficient, she said. I understand there's been a death. Litchfield's mouth tightened. A tragedy! Professor Kersey was a brilliant man. His death has rattled the men. And you suspect foul play? He exchanged a quick glance with Morley before answering. We suspect interference, perhaps from foreign interests, perhaps from our own competitors, perhaps even from within. He leaned forward. Detective Gray, if this site fails, if the Crown loses its chance to secure these resources, it will be a loss far greater than a single man's life. Eleanor met his gaze. A man's life is never insignificant, Mr. Litchfield, but I understand my orders. Protect the discovery. Find the saboteur. He smiled again, thinner, harder. Exactly. That evening, Eleanor toured the site. The derrick was eerily silent now, the drilling equipment powered down. Workers moved in small knots, whispering to one another, casting furtive glances at the stranger in their midst. She noted the heavy iron machinery, the wooden barrels of oil seeping dark puddles into the frozen ground, the shallow pits where dynamite had blasted through layers of stubborn rock. It was crude work, brutal, dangerous, and yet it could change the fate of a nation. Thomas Blackfoot stood apart from the others, near a cluster of geological charts pinned to a board. Eleanor approached him. "Thomas Blackfoot?" she asked. He nodded, his sharp brown eyes assessing her. "I'm Detective Gray. I understand you worked closely with Professor Kersey." "I did." "I'm sorry for your loss." He studied her for a long moment, then said, "The loss is all ours, not his." His voice was low, bitter. The land tried to speak to him. He would not listen. Now he will not speak at all. Eleanor absorbed that cryptic statement. Did he have enemies? "In this place," Thomas said with a grim smile, "everyone is an enemy. If not to you, then to your future." She thanked him and moved on, noting the way he turned his back on her almost immediately, not out of rudeness, but resignation. As she walked back toward the command cabin, the sky deepened into indigo, and a thin mist began to rise from the earth. In the growing darkness, the derrick looked less like a machine and more like a gallows. Somewhere nearby, a wolf howled, and somewhere closer still, Eleanor was certain, a murderer watched and waited. Chapter 3. Death in the Derrick. The next day, Eleanor Gray rose early. She had hardly slept, her mind restless, turning over impressions, motives, and the uncomfortable sensation of being watched. She dressed in her heavy wool coat and fur-lined gloves, pinned up her hair, and holstered her pistol before stepping outside. The air was bitingly cold, sharp with the scent of pine, burning coal, and something else, the faint metallic tang of oil. She found Declan Morley already awake, pouring a tin cup of coffee outside the mess tent. He looked up at her approach. "You're up early." "I rarely sleep well on the edge of murder." Morley grunted. Most of the men are still in their bunks. A few started early, checking gauges, warming the winches. Routine. "Has Mr. Litchfield stirred?" "Not yet. His routine begins with brandy and polished boots." She allowed herself a wry smile. "I'll take a walk through the rig." "Take care," Morley warned. "The derrick groans in the wind like a cathedral full of ghosts." Eleanor approached the derrick, a crude yet towering edifice of timber and iron bolts, surrounded by crates, oil drums, and partially disassembled equipment. The silence was punctuated by the creak of cables and the occasional drip of oil from somewhere unseen. She had only just reached the foot of the structure when she saw him. A young worker, no older than 20, sprinting from the direction of the derrick. He stumbled toward her, pale as a corpse and gasping. "Ma'am, inside," he stammered. "It's him. He's up there. He's dead." "Who?" Eleanor demanded, already moving. "Ritter, the German. Someone killed him. Oh, God, there's blood." Eleanor drew her pistol and motioned for the young man to stay back. She mounted the creaking ladder into the belly of the derrick. Halfway up, the scent hit her. Blood and oil mingled in a sickening perfume. At the top platform beneath the gear housing, she found the body. Klaus Ritter, the German engineer, lay on his back, eyes open in shock. A heavy spanner was still embedded in his skull, sunk deep into the left temple. His mouth was open in a final breathless scream, his coat soaked black with crude that oozed from a nearby ruptured pipe. Eleanor crouched down beside him, her eyes scanning the scene. No signs of struggle, no trail of blood leading up the ladder. Whoever had done this had known the layout of the rig, and had moved with calculated precision. She stood slowly and called down. "Send for Mr. Litchfield and Morley, and bring me the driller, Moreau." About 30 minutes later, the body had been removed and covered in a wool blanket. The rest of the camp had assembled in grim silence. Litchfield arrived wearing his overcoat and gloves, his face pale and stony. "Killed in broad daylight," he muttered, "on my rig." Eleanor was calm, her voice crisp and measured. Who had access to the derrick this morning? "Everyone," Moreau replied. He was short, wiry, with the look of a man who had once wrestled dynamite and lived to tell the tale. No locks on the ladders. Anyone with nerve and a steady foot could have climbed up. Eleanor turned to Thomas Blackfoot, who had joined them silently. "Did you know Ritter well?" "Well enough," Thomas said. "He liked his whiskey more than his instruments. He was intelligent and arrogant. He didn't like to be questioned, especially by me." "Did he have enemies?" Thomas met her eyes. "In a place like this, Miss Gray, every man is either a rival or a threat." "Did Professor Kersey and Ritter get along?" "They disagreed, often, about drilling methods, about what the land was telling us." Eleanor raised a brow. "And what was the land telling you, Mr. Blackfoot?" He hesitated. "That it wasn't ready." In the late afternoon, Eleanor requested access to Klaus Ritter's cabin. Morley unlocked the door and stood aside. Inside was a sparse bed, a set of diagrams, mechanical tools, and an open valise. Eleanor rummaged carefully. Underneath the false bottom of the suitcase, she found something unexpected: a coded journal. The script was in German, peppered with oil data and symbols she recognized from diplomatic intelligence files. "What is it?" Morley asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leafed through until she found a torn envelope, stamped with the seal of Valmar Petrochemicals, Munich. Attached was a note in English. "Ensure progress slows. Discredit the site if possible. British expansion into Alberta must be discouraged. Do not be discovered. E." There it was again. The signature. E. The same initial found in Professor Kersey's torn telegram. Was Ritter a saboteur? Or another victim? Eleanor tucked the letter into her coat and closed the valise. That night, Eleanor stood by the fire outside the mess tent, watching the flames dance against the cold darkness. 2 deaths now. 2 men who stood at the centre of Canada's most valuable discovery. One had been struck down with crude force, the other, perhaps, silenced for knowing too much. She turned toward the camp, her eyes narrowed. Tomorrow she would begin questioning everyone, because someone in Pinecroft had blood on their hands and oil on their boots. Chapter 4. Ghosts of Empire. Morning came veiled in grey mist. The camp was restless. Workers huddled in groups, whispering in nervous tones. 2 deaths in as many days had drained the morale from Pinecroft. Detective Eleanor Gray stood near the derrick, notebook in hand. A series of boot prints, half smudged and laced with traces of oil, led to and from the rig. She had traced them herself in the dawn light, noting that they were larger than Ritter's, and that one heel bore a distinct crack. A man's boot, size 11, possibly North American made, custom soles. She'd seen similar boots on 2 men in the camp, Litchfield himself and Alphonse Moreau. But before she accused anyone, she needed evidence, motive, context. And context, Eleanor knew, was almost always historical. Later that morning, she returned to Ritter's coded journal, spreading it across the map table in Litchfield's command cabin. She had managed to decipher enough of the cipher to understand its structure. Every third word was embedded with a pattern of military-grade encryption used during the Anglo-Boer conflict. There were repeated mentions of Project Edelstein and curious cross-references to other oil fields in Baku, Persia, and the Ottoman territories. Eleanor marked one phrase with a red pencil. Crown expansion is equal to blockade threat. Disrupt Turner Ridge before British claim is formalised. She looked up at Litchfield, who stood by the window nursing a tumbler of rye whiskey. "You never told me about foreign investors," she said. He turned, raising an eyebrow. "Because there aren't any. This is a Crown-backed initiative. The British government provided 51% of the funding. The rest came from local partners and one railway syndicate based in Ontario. And Ritter? He came highly recommended by my engineering board in London. He worked in Mesopotamia before this, Persia before that. His background checked out." "Not quite," she murmured, laying the torn envelope before him. The Valmar petrochemical seal stared back like an accusation. Litchfield paled. "That's impossible. Valmar is a rival to our backers in London." "Which makes it entirely possible. Ritter was embedded here to slow or sabotage operations under the guise of technical failure. Kersey may have found out." Litchfield exhaled slowly. "God help us." "Only if he's fluent in German," Eleanor said dryly. The Blackfoot encampment, that afternoon. Later that day, Eleanor rode out alone to the temporary camp where Thomas Blackfoot had pitched his personal quarters, at a little distance from the main site. She found him sitting cross-legged by a small fire, polishing a flint knife. "You came," he said without looking up. "You're a geologist, Mr. Blackfoot, educated, precise. What did Kersey discover just before he died?" He paused, then set the knife down. "He found sulphur traces in the southern trench. That wasn't supposed to be there." "Why not?" "Because the formation beneath it was too shallow, too recent. If sulphur's present, it suggests another deposit beneath. Deeper, older, larger." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "You're saying there's a second oil reserve?" He nodded. 10 times the size of the one we're drilling." "And Kersey told no one?" "He wrote it in his field notes. He planned to inform the British envoy once he'd confirmed it." She narrowed her eyes. "Which means someone had motive to silence him before the Crown could claim the deeper deposit." Thomas looked at her. "You're thinking like a Queen's agent." "I am a Queen's agent." He poked the fire thoughtfully. "Be careful, detective. This land has been traded, torn and measured by outsiders for decades. Now it bleeds something they can burn, and they will not care who gets scorched." That evening, a visitor arrived at the main camp. He came by horse, cloaked in a heavy duster coat, face obscured by a travel-stained scarf and brimmed hat. He bore no introduction, but carried the seal of the British Foreign Intelligence Office, an ivory card signed by Commissioner Rooke himself. He introduced himself in clipped tones. "Inspector Alton Reed, Foreign Office, Montreal Division." Eleanor met his gaze squarely. "You're late." "I wasn't expected." "Then why are you here?" He gestured toward her table where Ritter's journal lay open. That? Reed leaned over the coded entries, scanning them with sharp eyes. We've been tracking Valmar Petrochemicals since the Trans-Caspian sabotage in '98. They have deep pockets and shallow loyalties, German-backed, French-supported. They want to cut Britain out of the global oil game. Eleanor crossed her arms. And Ritter? Double agent, reported to us briefly during the Mesopotamian contracts. We lost track of him in Belgium, didn't expect him to resurface here. Well, he did, she said evenly. Then he died. Reed looked up at her. And if Kersey found a deeper oil well before the Crown staked its claim, then Canada just became the most valuable pawn on the imperial board. Eleanor turned away from him and looked out the window. The wind had picked up again, rattling the derrick like a dying creature. In the twilight, the oil-slicked earth shimmered darkly. This was no longer a simple murder investigation. This was espionage. This was war, fought not with guns, but with crude oil and imperial ambition. Later that night, when the camp had settled into uneasy quiet, Eleanor walked alone between the tents, her pistol at her side, her senses taut. A fresh wind blew from the ridge, carrying with it a sound of metal clinking. She turned a corner near the tool shed and froze. A figure, tall, hooded, was crouched by a crate of dynamite. He turned. Their eyes met. Eleanor shouted, "Stop!" But the shadow bolted, vanishing into the darkness like a ghost. She ran after him, boots pounding the mud, breath sharp in her throat. The figure darted through machinery, under platforms, over oil barrels. Then a shot rang out. Not hers. A second, then silence. By the time she reached the ridge, he was gone. But he'd left behind something. A glove, oil-stained, and inside a folded piece of paper. One word scrawled in ink, Blackthorn. Chapter 5. The Widow's Ledger. Eleanor Gray stood beneath the eaves of the supply cabin, turning the recovered glove in her hands. The paper inside it, scrawled with the single word Blackthorn, had no signature, no markings. Yet to her, it was a door, a name, a clue that reeked of code name. "Blackthorn," she said aloud. Declan Morley appeared beside her, brushing snow from his coat. "Could be anything," he said. "A name, a company, a password. Blackthorn's a hardy bush. Poisonous, too, if you don't know how to brew it right." She looked out across the camp. "And fittingly difficult to uproot." Later that morning, the widow's cottage. Professor Emmett Kersey had lived apart from the others. His cottage stood on a bluff overlooking the rig, built sturdily with help from local Métis carpenters. It was modest, with stone around the hearth and bookcases crammed with geological texts and maps. Mrs. Evelyn Kersey, his widow, greeted Eleanor at the door with pale, tired eyes and a voice that trembled like frost on a branch. "I've already given a statement," she said softly. "This isn't for the report," Eleanor assured her. "I'm not just investigating a murder, Mrs. Kersey. I'm trying to prevent a larger one." Evelyn hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the air was warm, scented faintly with lavender and wax. A kettle sang quietly on the stove. Eleanor took a seat near the fire, while Evelyn fetched a leather-bound notebook from a locked drawer in her husband's desk. "He kept a public logbook for the drilling company," Evelyn explained, "and a private one for himself. I found this after he died. It's encoded in places. He was a careful man." Eleanor opened the book and began to skim. There were field sketches of oil seepage, sulphur readings, pressure estimates, but scattered throughout were pages that had nothing to do with geology. Names, initials, numbers, meeting times, letters not sent. There was an entry dated February 22nd that caught her eye. "Ritter suspicious, took map copies, Telegram from E intercepted. Warned by Thomas not to share Deepwell location yet. He's right. Not safe. Litchfield pressing too hard. I fear we're not alone in this camp. Another note read, Blackthorn may be the linchpin. Tracks back to Valmar Petroleum. Not German Crown, but private cartel. Possibly French arms interest funding it. Selling oil rights before discovery confirmed. And beside that, a single word underlined in crimson pencil. Treason? Eleanor stood with the ledger clutched tight beneath her coat. If Kersey had found a second well, and Ritter was planted to undermine the operation, then someone else was orchestrating it all. Not just sabotage. A sale. Preemptive contracts. The British Crown might lose Alberta's oil not through violence, but paperwork. And Blackthorn, was it a code name for the agent executing this sale? She needed more. That afternoon, she visited the Pinecroft Telegraph Office. The telegraph shack in Pinecroft was barely larger than a tool shed. A pot-bellied stove kept the space tolerable, and a bespectacled operator named Milton Boyd manned the keys. Eleanor showed him a note signed by Commissioner Rooke authorising access to all outbound telegrams from Pinecroft over the past 6 weeks. Boyd, eager to help, produced a logbook and an armful of paper duplicates. Most were unremarkable. Orders for equipment, messages to family, minor disputes wired to Calgary. But 3 were flagged high priority and bore strange routing instructions sent not directly to London or Ottawa, but via Montreal, then Geneva. Each bore initials, EL. Who's EL? Eleanor asked. Boyd shrugged. Didn't recognise the name, but those messages were paid in gold. Back at camp, the lights in Litchfield's cabin burned late. Eleanor entered without knocking. He looked up from his desk, startled but attempting composure. "I'd say good evening, detective," he muttered, "but I suspect you're not here for pleasantries." She tossed the ledger onto his desk. It landed with a solid thump. Emmett Kersey documented everything, including suspicious financial movements, off-record geological transfers, and someone named Blackthorn. Do you recognise that name? His face flickered, just for a second, but she saw it. I've heard the term. A syndicate, I believe. European. Rumours only. Then tell me about EL, she said coldly. He hesitated. I received pressure, he finally said. 3 months ago. Anonymous letters, promises of funding, if I allowed certain observers to join the team. Ritter was one. The rest were quietly absorbed into the Labour ranks. And in return? They wanted a share in the land rights, before discovery, before British registration. The oil beneath Pinecroft was to be split into private hands, sold back to the Empire later at a premium. Privatised plunder. And you agreed? I stalled. I fed them delays. But once Kersey found the second vein, I realised the game was beyond me. You were working both sides. I was trying to keep this place alive, he snapped, standing now. Do you know what happens if this site fails? If the Crown loses interest? These men, these families, they starve. Eleanor's voice was calm, cold steel. So you invited in the enemy to protect your place in the Empire? He looked away. She returned to her cabin, mind pulsing with names, connections, betrayals. She spread the ledger, the telegram transcripts, the glove, and the torn Valmar envelope out on her bunk like pieces of a puzzle. Blackthorn, Valmar, E.L. Litchfield had sold half his soul to preserve his claim. Ritter had sold his entirely. Kersey tried to protect the truth, and died for it. And someone else, still out there, was holding the final thread. Eleanor reached for her pistol. Tomorrow she would find Blackthorn, and pull that thread until the whole operation unravelled, even if it meant dragging the British Empire into the oil-soaked shadows it had tried so long to pretend did not exist. Chapter 6. Sabotage and Silence. The wind returned with a vengeance. It whipped across the foothills like a predator, tearing through the camp, rattling loose shutters, flapping canvas tents like panicked wings. A storm was moving in from the Rockies, the kind that swallowed travellers and truths alike. But Eleanor Gray had no time for weather. She strode into the site command cabin at dawn, eyes set and jaw clenched. On the table, she unrolled a charcoal-rubbed map of the drilling site, the main derrick, the access tunnel to the secondary trench, the sulphur pit, and the dynamite storage facility, all scrawled in field-hand symbols and rough edges. Thomas Blackfoot stood beside her, silent and steady. "There are 4 potential weak points," Eleanor said, tapping the map. "Ritter was found here." She jabbed the top platform of the derrick. "And dynamite was tampered with here." She moved to a mark beside the southern trench. "Someone is planning to bring the whole place down." Thomas studied the parchment. "You believe they'll strike again?" "I'm certain of it," Eleanor replied. "And this time it won't be one man dead in the dark. It'll be all of us." At noon, a scream shattered the brittle quiet. Men ran from the north slope, shouting. Smoke rose like a signal from the base of the derrick. Not a full fire, but a controlled ignition, a warning. Eleanor arrived within minutes, pistol drawn. The charred remains of an oil barrel smouldered near the derrick's rear axle. A small trail of gunpowder had been laid, leading up to a crate marked A-grade TNT. By a stroke of fortune, or someone's hesitation, it hadn't reached the fuse. "What in God's name?" Litchfield began, panting as he rushed to the scene. Eleanor held up a scorched matchbook. The initials EL were scribbled inside the flap. She stared at Litchfield. "You were warned, and they're escalating." Alphonse Moreau was brought in by 2 workers, arms folded, his eyes dancing with defensive indignation. "I light no fuse," he spat. "I am a dynamiter, yes, but for drilling, not killing." "You were near the storage this morning," Eleanor said. "Your boots, size 11, with a cracked heel, were seen at the trench. A barrel was rolled. I found a scuff mark from a heel just like yours." Moreau laughed bitterly. "I am French-Canadian detective, not a saboteur. If I wanted this place gone, it would have vanished yesterday." Eleanor leaned in. "Who do you report to, Mr. Moreau?" He flinched, almost imperceptibly. "I report to the drill," he said, "and to no one else." But his hesitation was enough. She would have someone follow him. That night, Eleanor received a knock at her door. It was Thomas Blackfoot. "I found something," he said quietly. They walked together in the snow, past the sleeping camp, until they reached the southern ridge. There, hidden behind a thicket of wind-bent firs, Thomas uncovered a sealed oilskin satchel. Inside was a secondary geological map, marked in red pencil, a partially burned ledger of Valmar Petrochem contracts, and a dispatch envelope bearing an unfamiliar insignia, a thorned black rose. Not a company, a symbol, Blackthorn. Thomas handed Eleanor a folded letter tucked inside. To E.L. confirmed destruction of Turner Ridge, Derrick by March 12th. British registration delayed. All rights default to Valmar under Shadow Charter. Payment to be routed through Antwerp. Do not implicate cartel. Blackthorn. She stared at the name. Antwerp, Valmar, Shadow Charter. This was bigger than sabotage. This was economic warfare. At dawn, Eleanor received news that one of the engineers, a quiet man named Willis Dunn, had not reported for shift. His cabin was locked from the outside. Inside, Eleanor found his body slumped across his bunk, poisoned. She found a bitter almond scent on his breath and a broken glass on the floor. Cyanide. In his footlocker, she discovered 3 false identity cards, a hand-drawn cipher wheel identical to the one Ritter used, a pocket diary with only one name written over and over, Eleanor Gray. She closed the book slowly. Someone had put a price on her life. Back at her quarters, Eleanor unrolled the ledger again, staring at the last few lines of Kersey's final entry. "They'll strike when the land shifts. When everyone's looking at the second well, it's misdirection, like sleight of hand. Look left, strike right." And then it clicked. The southern trench, where everyone thought the second well was the decoy. The real reserve was buried under the storage facility itself. She rushed out into the cold night, racing toward the stacked crates. Inside the centre, a crate labelled Mining Survey Tools. She pried it open, not tools. C8 demolition charges, clock triggered, and the timer was ticking. Eleanor called for Thomas and Morley. "Help me disarm this," she ordered, her hands already at the wires. "We have minutes." Morley paled. "That's military grade, European." Thomas stepped beside her. "Cut the green and black first, then the copper." Sweat stung Eleanor's eyes. Her breath misted in the frigid air. Snip! Snip! The timer stopped with just 3 more seconds to go. The 3 of them stood still, breathing hard, alive, but only barely. Back at camp, with the threat averted, for now, Eleanor burned the letter from Blackthorn, but not before copying every word. This wasn't over. She knew what the cartel wanted, but now she knew where they would strike next. Registration Day, March 12th, tomorrow. If they couldn't destroy the oil by dynamite, they'd destroy it by law. She poured herself a cup of strong tea, sat in the firelight, and sharpened her pen. Tomorrow she would write her letter. To London, and to the empire that must decide, protect its land or lose its soul. Chapter 7. The Black Vein. Revealed, March 12th, 1902, Turner Ridge, Alberta. The morning broke hard and cold. Ice clung to the derrick's beams like silver veins. The wind, now sharp and low, swept through Pinecroft like a last breath held in anticipation. Snow still laced the ground, but something had shifted in the air. Today was Registration Day. The representatives from the British Crown's Colonial Resource Bureau were due to arrive by noon, escorted by armed Mounties. Their arrival would trigger formal land claim certification. The deeper oil deposit, if verified and mapped, would fall under British dominion. For Eleanor Gray, it was the fulcrum of the investigation, and the conspirators would not let it pass without making their final move. Eleanor began the day by staging a diversion. Working with Thomas Blackfoot and Declan Morley, she had 2 crates of marked survey explosives placed near the southern trench, the decoy deposit, and had them discovered during a routine check. Word of potential sabotage spread quickly. It worked. By 9:30 a.m., every suspect in camp had drifted toward the trench, including Harold Litchfield, Alphonse Moreau, and several engineers she no longer trusted. She remained at the storage site, watching, waiting, and at 9:47 her trap was sprung. A lone figure slipped into the oil shed. Unaware, Eleanor stood just behind the door, gun raised. "Hands where I can see them." The man froze. Slowly he turned. It was Inspector Alton Reed, the Foreign Office liaison, sent from Montreal. "You," Eleanor said evenly. He smiled, almost impressed. "I wondered if you'd figure it out." "You forged Rook's signature," she said, "gained access to camp, eliminated Ritter when he became a liability, planted explosives near the storage facility, and killed Willis Dunn, the only man who knew your real name." Reed slowly removed his gloves, revealing oil-stained fingers. "Do you have any idea how much this oil is worth?" he asked softly. "To the French Navy, to the Germans, the Americans would kill for 1/10 of it. You think the Empire will do anything more than drain it and move on?" I don't serve the oil, Eleanor replied. I serve the law. Reed stepped forward as she cocked her gun. Don't! But he moved anyway, fast, drawing a blade from inside his coat. Her shot rang out like thunder. Reed staggered, hand to his side, then dropped the knife and crumpled. Morley and Thomas burst in moments later. Eleanor holstered her pistol. He's bleeding! Tie him! He talks before he dies. 11 o'clock. The truth comes out. Under pressure, Reed spilled everything. He had worked under the alias Blackthorn for nearly 6 years, a broker and agent for an unofficial oil cartel with French-German funding. His mission? Stall British claims in newly discovered sites until private ownership could be claimed by proxy firms. Pinecroft was the most promising. I had men on the inside, he rasped. Ritter, Dunn, Moreau, Litchfield knew. He just thought he could play both sides. And Kersey? Eleanor asked. Reed's eyes flicked with something that almost resembled regret. He got too close. He wanted to alert London, so I arranged a fall from the derrick. He wasn't supposed to fight back. Too close, Eleanor repeated. That seems to be a fatal trait in this business. At the stroke of noon, a caravan of sleighs approached the ridge. British colonial agents in black wool coats disembarked, accompanied by Royal Canadian Mounted Police. A Union Jack flapped atop the main pole as the registrar, Lord Grafton, unrolled his parchments. Eleanor met him halfway. She handed him a sealed letter and a dossier of evidence, coded telegrams, the Valmar ledger, Kersey's notebook, the Blackthorn cipher, and Reed's confession, signed in a blood-smeared hand. Lord Grafton read it in silence, his brows rising, then furrowing. "You've uncovered something truly appalling," he said at last. "Not uncovered," Eleanor corrected. "Contained," he nodded. "Your recommendation?" "Secure the site, seize all corporate papers, register the entire ridge, both deposits, under Crown stewardship, and strip Litchfield of authority." "And the foreign cartel?" "Let them come," Eleanor said, "but they'll find the doors closed and watched." The Union Jack now flew proudly over the camp. The derrick stood untouched. The explosives were removed. Reed was taken into custody, his wounds stabilised. Litchfield, publicly disgraced, was escorted east for inquiry. Moreau, strangely, had vanished before the Mounties arrived. Eleanor suspected someone had warned him. But Turner Ridge remained in Canadian hands, and beneath its cold soil a black vein pulsed, not just with oil, but with power. Eleanor's final entry, March 12, 1902. The Empire's shadow is long and not always cast by its enemies. In Pinecroft, I did not simply prevent a murder. I prevented a theft of our future. Oil is not gold. It stains, it burns, and it draws the worst of men from every corner of the globe. But this land, this wild, stubborn land, remains ours. I will not let the shadows win. She closed her journal. Outside, Thomas Blackfoot stood watching the twilight settle over the ridgeline. "Do you think they'll come back?" he asked. Eleanor looked west, toward the fading sun. "Yes, in another form, another name. Greed always does." Then she turned toward the train station. Her next summons from the Crown would come soon. But for tonight, Alberta was safe. And she, Eleanor Gray, had earned one night of silence,